Well, Jane, I am thrilled to have you here today. The really fun part is not only do I feel like I know you pretty well, but I've had you on as a guest on other shows. And so we're pretty facile at doing this little dance. So, first of all, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Love dancing with you.
Well, I love dancing with you too. And one of the things that I want to get into, and I know a bit of this story, but you have a very unique sort of set of titles and things that you do, which are part of what make you special. And I like to ask a lot of guests, sort of how did they come to be what they are. But your three things: a health economist, which some people may not have heard before. It's becoming, I think, a more common title in healthcare, a trend weaver, an author, and then a global educator. Maybe those last two people understand. But let's talk a little bit about what led you down the path to become these sort of very visible, very important roles in the healthcare system.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, again, thank you for the invitation. It's so lovely to reconnect always with you. Um, Health economics came into its own in the last, I don't know, 20, 25 years. I went to college before it was a formal major at universities. And so an undergraduate, all my education in college is from University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, go blue, Wolverines. Um, After undergrad with a degree in economics and a degree in what was like a media degree, I did them at the same time. So I've always wanted to communicate. But health economics is what I majored in, BA economics at U of M. Worked for a few years in the energy industry. This is when Jimmy Carter was president. They were looking at alternative energy back then. I was one of those kind of people, wanting to even then be involved in environmental things. Then I worked in market research for Market Opinion Research, a very big polling company, largely working with Republicans, which was difficult for me with my last name of Sarasohn because my father was very involved in Democratic state politics. A long story short, I left there about the time my mother was in her end stage of lymphocytic leukemia after 8 brave years of fighting. So this gets to the health economics part as a young economist. In her last 13 days of life, which were in a hospital, because back then in 79 there was not palliative care the way we know it now, or even hospice the way we know it now. She was in hospital at the end for 13 days, came to over $100,000 then, 1979. My mother had a union negotiated health plan through Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. When my father got what we now know as an EOB, he only had to pay for the TV and the phone in the hospital, zero on clinical care. The TV and the phone. And that is what has been come to be known as a Cadillac plan. Literally, we lived in suburban Detroit. So the people who worked in education and other unions outside of Detroit benefited from what the labor arbitrators at the car companies were doing for unions back then. So I come from a union family background. Long story short, I looked at that piece of paper that said dad only owed, I don't know, a couple $100. And I said, what's going on here? Dug into what health insurance was, because when you're, 22, you don't really think about that sort of thing. And I reapplied to go to graduate school at University of Michigan to Rackham School of Graduate Studies for Economics and the School of Public Health in Health Planning, which is basically forecasting and administration, and forged a degree in health economics because it fascinated me through that experience. And ever since then, leaving Michigan, I moved to Philly, and I've only ever been a healthcare consultant in my entire career across the whole ecosystem eventually, but starting off with a firm that worked with hospitals, health insurance, and providers, doctors. And that was the beginning of the health economist phase of my life. I fell in love with an international banker in Philadelphia. I married him. He was already in London and moved to London. And that's where I cut my teeth on the next group of health ecosystem players, pharma and technology. And that was from the London office of Touche Ross, now Deloitte. And so I go way back then when there was like the big five, the big six accounting-based consulting firms, and then came back to the U.S. and continued my career as a health consultant, and eventually went off on my own, having come up for partnership in the firm, which is the usual track in a big consulting firm. And I made a huge decision not to become a partner in a big firm because I wanted to become a mom. The kind of mom I wanted to be was to be available and not traveling all the time, and created a business before really we knew about the gig economy and work from home. It was a unique thing back then. You use Staples as your office supply company to fax and to do things like that. And the faxes were funky, shiny paper. And a 286 compact computer cost a fortune, which is what I had to buy. And to tell you how mature and older I am in my career, when I started, we had no open internet and certainly no cell phones, but we had America Online, CompuServe, and Prodigy. And I had to pay for internet services. There was no Google and Gmail. I paid almost $30 for each, so almost $100 a month I paid for internet.
The
So
audacity.
it was nuts. You're looking at, the whole Earth catalog time, and it was a crazy time to start a business, but I did it and had this expertise with healthcare finance, healthcare, and increasingly then looking at the patient view. So that's the early days of health economics, and we didn't have the internet. I started the blog Health Populi in 2007, and that really ratcheted up my role as a voice or influencer, before we used that word, in 2007. And today, my blog Health Populi has over 3,000 posts, all written by me, no ads, no monetization. It's a free thing. And it's a big library by now. So yeah, that's how it evolved, largely on the growth of the internet and healthcare. And that's when I started my business. I quickly affiliated with Institute for the Future in your neck of the woods and Menlo Park, working with Ian Morrison, who's no longer with us. I miss him terribly. One of the most interesting people in our healthcare world. And then California Healthcare Foundation, I did a whole lot of work for many years, writing white papers about health and technology. And so much so that most people I would meet in conferences thought I lived in California and not in Pennsylvania. So that's my accountant would tell you over the many years, a lot of my consulting income has been derived from your state.
Well, I love it. And during these crazy times, it's actually not the worst place in the world. You've been a lot over in Europe, so that's a good place to be. I've been in California. That's been a safe place to be. And just a couple of fun things to unpack. So the Institute for the Future, I actually had my first opportunity to go there with a friend, Jessie Draper. I don't know if you know Jessie. Lovely person. Jane's nodding her head. She's lovely, good people. Her dad, Tim, was there. And so we did get a tour and got to sort of familiarize ourselves. And then two other interesting side stories. So singer-songwriter Aloe Black has been on the show. He was a consultant and he got laid off and went the singer route. Thank goodness. I'm glad you
Yes.
decided not to take the partnership. And then the
Right.
last is a friend of mine, I think probably a friend of yours from Michigan, Alyssa Slotkin, who's the U.S. Senator. We've interviewed her internally before, but she has a similar story, except she was in a horrible situation insurance-wise, which is why she decided to run for the House of Representatives in Michigan in a very conservative district, because she's like, this is BS and something needs to be done about this.
Yeah.
So I'm sad about your mom, but happy that you and your dad were not put in a horrible ditch as a result of that. And I am grateful that you chose the path you did, because you have put a lot of your smarts and intelligence into the world. And I would highly encourage people to go and look at your blog, because some people write and they're like these little cutesy passages. Jane does some very deep dive research, economic. This is her Health Economist coming out. And so a lot of the things that she posts on LinkedIn, a lot of the things that she puts up on the blog are very substantive and very research oriented. So thank you for giving us that gift. I do want to shift into something, and we're going to dig on this topic in a few different places, because One of them sort of became a book, and we'll get to that one later. But you're on the record as arguing that we currently are health consumers, but we need to become health citizens. And I love this concept of health citizenship. And again, we'll get to that in a bit. But talk a little bit about the fundamental difference in mindset and responsibility between those two.
So for a long time, many years, I've been using the phrase health consumer, that the patient is a health consumer. And it was at the time when Paul Krugman, the great writer at the New York Times, in the op-ed section, would argue that there's no such thing as a health consumer. I never ever said a health consumer in America isn't screwed by the system or doesn't have angst and problems with the system. Just because you're a consumer doesn't mean you always have the cards in your hand. To be a consumer, we think about Consumers Union, Consumer Reports, or a retail store called Syms, SYMS, that was big in New York and east of the Mississippi many years ago, led by a retailer named Cy Syms, who said in his ads, "An educated consumer is our best customer." My dad was in the rag trade. That's what sent me to college. So I'm big in retail health for a lot of reasons. One of which is my dad was a retail guy. So health consumer, because at some point when I was working with GlaxoSmithKline in the diabetes franchise many years ago, we were looking at the co-payments for prescription drugs and what Mrs. Jones would pay when she checked out of CVS, Rite Aid, Walgreens at the point of purchase, because we didn't have a lot of mail order back then. And we saw co-pays for drugs getting wider and wider in health plans, again, well before Part D Medicare. So a copay would go from $0 for a generic to maybe $5 or $10, from $20 or $30 for an on-brand, and then for an off-label tier 3 or 4 co-insurance. 100%, 50% of retail. And when I started to see Mrs. Jones at the point of purchase asking the question, or noticing in her wallet she had a $20 or $30 bill, or maybe a budget of $50 at the time on her credit card, and it was her husband's, let's say, birthday, and he wanted an Norelco razor, she had to make a choice at the point of purchase. Do I pay for the drug, or do I pay for the Norelco razor because it's Mr. Jones's birthday? And I was raising this to GSK at the time in the diabetes franchise, saying, this is important. Mrs. Jones is the end user. So you've negotiated with the health plan, but Mrs. Jones is paying out of pocket. And that's when, this is a long time ago, when we saw these co-payment ranges getting wider and wider, started to hit me, okay, this is health consumerism starting at the point of purchase for the prescription drug. Now, of course, we have high deductibles, high co-insurance, people paying fully out of pocket or negotiating for discounts or whatever. This is, of course, we didn't have GoodRx, we didn't have single care, we didn't have all that. So consumer, because as we pay out of pocket more and more, and Americans are across all these different financial flows, we are feeling healthcare is retail. We are behaving right now. Kaiser Family Foundation's study a couple weeks ago came out to say it's healthcare costs that are the number one cost U.S. families are facing in terms of anxiety, ahead of my rent and mortgage, the gas in my car, or energy and utilities. Healthcare costs are now the number one financial worry in American household kitchen tables. So health consumers, yes, that is how I think about this now in terms of healthcare at retail, as people pay more out of pocket. If that's the case, it should be an enchanting retail experience, the way we might experience at any of our favorite retailers, from online Amazon to the typical example has been Nordstrom as a great consumer experience. Not so anymore in my neck of the woods at either Nordstrom or Nordstrom Rack, and I'll go on the record to say that. Brick and mortar is tough to do. So I like Shinola of Detroit. They do a great brick and mortar experience, but there aren't a whole lot of those. They're mostly showrooms. So in any case, retail. And what can we learn from retail, to the best kind of retail, to bring to healthcare? Transparency, trust, partnership, co-creation, omni-channel, lots of places to go, buy online, pick up, buy online, go in the store, buy online, get it delivered, etc. So yeah, we're learning in healthcare how to be better in a retail sense, but we have a long way to go for the health consumer.
Well, that's a great background on that, and I like that word versus patient, even though you gave a lot of the caveats there. And so I do want to drill into that concept of health citizenship. So you've written two books, and we'll get back to the first book in a second, but the second one was called Health Citizenship. It was sort of inspired by the pandemic. So how do we become better health citizens, and how does that differentiate, or how would you differentiate that from that idea of a health consumer, which feels like more of a passive versus more of an active, participating and helping move things forward?
Yeah, I did write the book Health Citizenship in the midst of the first year of the pandemic, noticing people, of course, shifting to the home as their health hub, as their hub for education, for cooking, for fitness, and all of a sudden people really having to be mindful and responsible. So say, oh, I don't know, a vaccine would be important to get when we could get them, to allay contracting the virus or getting really sick from it in terms of hospitalization or ultimately death. And so when we think about health citizenship, we have rights and responsibilities, and I talk about four pillars. The first pillar is universal right to healthcare, healthcare as a civil right, thinking like Martin Luther King. My background in Detroit, got a lot of exposure to early civil rights, LBJ, signing Medicare to law, Civil Rights Law, Voting Rights Act, etc. So healthcare as a civil right. Everybody gets healthcare. A healthcare in every pot, right? That's a health citizenship pillar. Everybody gets healthcare. Another one is you get really good privacy data rights. In the US, we don't have this. We have HIPAA, but when HIPAA was conceived, we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have payment, Venmo, we didn't have the fact that your social check-ins can be tracked and we can figure out, oh, you're either an alcoholic or you're irresponsible with spending money, or you're eating too much fast food at McDonald's, or you went to the best little whorehouse in Texas and paid via a credit card. Not a smart thing to do if you're doing that. In any case, we can track stuff. And when I wrote a paper for California Healthcare Foundation, it's hard to believe, back in 2013, it was called Making Sense of Sensors. And back then, I warned that sensors can create digital footprints and collect data. And this was 13 years ago. So HIPAA was sort of middle-aged by then. Now, of course, we have HIPAA and we have other privacy laws in the US. But when I'm in Europe and I use any number of online services like Google, I'm covered by GDPR, the Grand Privacy Directive. When I'm in the US, I'm not. So I have dual citizenship with Italy, therefore the EU. So I'm covered when I'm in Europe and living in Europe and working in Europe. This is this bipolar sense I have. Where am I and what do I share? And do I use a credit card or cash or whatever? So privacy. So the two positive rights you have in my definition of health citizenship is healthcare and a really robust privacy regime. But you have two responsibilities. One is you have to do good by your neighbor. So get the vaccine, live a healthy life, go to Johan Sonnen and Go Invo Studio and look at all of his beautiful health graphics on positive health behaviors. I won't go into all of them now, but they're inspiring, and they talk about all the good things we can do for ourselves and our communities for public health. And the fourth one is Love is the killer app. So I'm quoting from Tim Sanders' book. Love thy neighbor, do all this, and that means go vote and vote with health and well-being and neighborliness on the mind. So rights and responsibilities for health citizenship. And this is a year in 2026 where we have a big midterm election, which I think health will be on the mind, both in terms of patients. So our mutual friend Matthew Zachary's book is due out imminently, called We the Patients. By the time this gets broadcast, it will be out. And
So
we there
I
you
just have to
go.
show this prop. So anyone listening, I'm holding up a mug that says "We the Patients." I've been on the advisory board of aforementioned Matthew Zachary,
There
MZ,
you go.
as he's affectionately called. So I had to invoke that. So sorry to interrupt.
He's my bro from another mother. And Matthew uh, is really arguing for this health citizenship, not just for cancer patients, but for all patients as health citizens beyond consumerism. So yeah, we want to vote with health on the mind, and he believes, and I believe, this election will be an election for healthcare and public health, and certainly the big election in 2028 will definitely be a healthcare election as well.
Yeah, I almost feel like this might be the biggest election, these midterms, at least in terms of midterms that we've ever had. I feel like it's just such a critical time. And look, we both lean left. I try to be pragmatic from a fiscal perspective. I think we've gotten so unable to communicate. We've become so tribal that I would love to see some of that sort itself out in this. So, anyway, a plug for us to reinforce that universal right of voting and exercising that vote and not complaining if we don't do that. I do want to dig back into something that you're very steeped in, you talk a lot about, and we'll get a little bit into your experience at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which is now featuring a lot more health. But you often say health is where we live, work, and play and pray, which I like. So this, idea of the home as the health hub. So here's the one thing I think we have to be careful of, which is how can technology truly turn our homes into the primary health hub without creating digital fatigue? Because I think both you and I are pretty digitally savvy. You referenced using a VPN as we were jumping on the call. But there are a lot of people that don't like their kids might or their neighbor might set up the Amazon or they might set up the TV or whatever, but they don't really know how it works. And when they have to add something or the software gets out of sync or the hub gets out of sync, it's a pain in the butt, right? So tell us a little bit more about how we find that balance between leaning into healthcare as our home as our health hub and not feeling sort of digitally fatigued.
History is a good teacher if we pay attention. If we look back to the implementation of Medicare Part D when it launched, most of the applications were online. How many seniors did we know at the time, Medicare beneficiaries, who had access to the internet or at least knew how to get to Medicare.gov and sign up? So largely they were working with grandchildren or adult children or people at the library. And libraries are great places to do health education, health information, and use computers for free in many markets. We love our public libraries. So in any case, that was designed by not looking at the users. Medicare Part D initial enrollment. We come to learn now the importance of design, and this is the point. When we look, we ask people to do more self-care because that's a good thing. It always was. Kitchen table wisdom from grandparent to grandchild, etc. Now that kitchen table wisdom is largely digital. We share recipes online. We learned how to make sourdough bread, but what we also learned in the pandemic was many households were cut off from Wi-Fi. They might have had cell connections on their phone if the household could afford to pay for a data plan. But now, and as I've said for many years, connectivity is a social determinant of health. So along with that health plan in every pot, we have to make sure that every individual is connected in some way. And I truly believe that is part of how we live now, work, apply for jobs. And if you didn't have connectivity in the pandemic, you couldn't go to school, you couldn't do your job if you could do your job from home, etc. So we have to be really careful that first people are connected, digitally literate. And as we think about literacy in general, There's health literacy. You get a prescription, you know how to take your pill orally or through the ear, as many people confuse certain liquids that way for infection, which is a true thing. But also digital literacy. One, access, but two, do you know how to use it? And are you also careful in not falling into scams? There's a lot of aspects to
Yeah.
digital literacy now in healthcare. So we have to, when we think about health at in the home via telehealth, virtual care, self-care, we need to ensure that in developing the products and services, we are building in privacy by design, literacy by design, and enchantment by design, so people adopt it, use it over time, and making sure the data are protected, secured in that health citizenship pillar, which is called privacy. And today, it's not there.
Well, that's good words of wisdom. And I love that idea of like digital and health literacy. Let's talk a little bit about CES. So this is an event that happens the first or second week of January in Vegas. It was huge for a long time. I know early in my career, then it died a little bit, and it seems like it's come back in full force in the last maybe 7 to 10 years. And part of why it has, and part of why it's become more relevant to people like you and me who've worked in healthcare for a while, is there is this digital health component of it. So you don't have to recap the entire thing, but any highlights that caught your attention, launches, showcases while you were there.
Yeah. So this was my 16th, 1/6 CES. Even in the pandemic, that one was in the deep pandemic, that was virtual, but we still had CES. It was all on Zoom platforms and other platforms. Digital health has grown year by year by year over those 16 years. And that's why I go. For me, looking at this retail health landscape, the Home is Health Hub, retail health, consumer empowerment, for me, it's the most important conference of the year. I go for a whole week. I go a couple days ahead of time, always meet clients beforehand, sometimes walk the floor with them throughout the week, look at certain vendors and meetings. We've seen it grow up from the Fitbit, Nike, Under Armour era now to not just the digital health aisles at the Venetian Sands, which those three companies I mentioned were part of the digital health aisles in the Venetian Sands exhibition hall, but for me now, with me looking at healthcare everywhere, I have to go far away to the big convention center to meet with a few connected car companies who are building wellness beyond safety, wellness into cars. Big company in Germany that I'm working with, and other companies from Korea and Japan. Some of the American companies dabbling, but I'm seeing more in Europe and Asia coming out of that. You go then to the content creator areas in ARIA, which are streaming health information, Google and Facebook and everybody there, and Netflix, so we're looking at media for health education, health entertainment, health infotainment, really important. So now you got to cover the whole of Vegas, which is really hard to do. We need clones. I have a very strict budget of time I spend with different people in different places. This year, just headline, heart health is now table stakes for a lot of smart watches, smart remote health monitoring, etc. Sleep is super important. We have a lot of interesting sleep support technologies beyond a CPAP, which you need to live if you have sleep apnea and to have a healthy heart. So I think sleep, heart, activity tracking you can do with anything. So that's no longer a thing in itself anymore. But increasingly now we're doing very sophisticated clinical grade stuff. A lot of people have heard of KardioMobile, and that's FDA cleared and millions of users. And so at that level of really great integrity of the device, if it gets through FDA, it's very exciting. Now, FDA is changing how it's looking at software as medicine versus just tracking without clinical advice. So we have to see how that's going to shake out in terms of regulatory regime. That's a caveat. but increasingly CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, is a go-to place for health tech standards, health tech community, and that's what I find there, working with some wonderful vendor relationships who are members of CTA. So I would suggest anyone interested in digital health, get to Vegas. It's really just a 3-day meeting: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe Friday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next January, first or second week, as Aaron said. It's so worth going to, but also to look at the home as health hub areas. So we think about the smart kitchen, the connected refrigerator. I've been tracking Samsung's smart fridge for a long time, and it's starting to now develop recipes for people to look in the window through the app as you're driving home from work, seeing what's in the fridge, and then generating a recipe for you managing, say, type 2 diabetes, and saying you better stop at Kroger on the way home and pick up these 3 ingredients you don't have. And by the way, the refrigerator's communicating to Kroger to get that package together so you could just line up outside, and then we'll deliver it to your car. So we're starting to see these seamless interactions through open standards, and the movement of our personal data that we choose to share with trusted partners to bring convenience, joy, and health to our lives. And that's my holy grail, is to have this connected system in a trust by design environment so that we can get on with our lives, live well, cook at home, and feed our families good meals and sit around the table. That's that's it. That's the holy grail.
I appreciate the report from the field. And, who knew we would live in a world? You didn't mention this, but you and I have talked about smart toilets, that there would come a day where smart cars and smart toilets would play a role in our health, but it is all consuming, right? All over the place. I do want to zoom back a little bit, and you've touched on some of these companies, but we do have these entities like CVS all the way to Amazon. And over the last 10 years, these retail giants have moved really sort of firmly into primary care. I mean, we've seen Best Buy dabble in it. We've seen tons of other companies. Do you see this as a democratization of health, or a fragmentation of the patient-doctor relationship? And I hadn't really ever thought of that second piece, but it definitely does have that potential to disintermediate, which I think inherently is a bad thing. But if the access and the regular visiting becomes easier, then it probably balances those two out. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
We're at a real turning point. I'll use the 2 letters AI just for a moment, because I'm not your AI expert, and nor should you trust me on this. But on this particular issue, where people are now searching for AI through AI, the way we did Google, paging Dr. Google, the old phrase, now 40% of Americans in the last year have used ChatGPT for health and healthcare, largely younger people. But an AARP study that I talked about recently found that up to a third of people over 50, again, AARP's constituency is 50 and over, use AI to consult on health conditions, prescriptions, etc. The doctor-patient relationship is at an interesting pivot point. I'm very collegial with John White, who's now head of AMA, Dr. John White, and we're in the middle of a discussion with many people, not him per se, but people I'm speaking to now, looking at, can AI be a bridge between doctors and patients, or will it quote replace the doctor? Which some younger people are less excited about having a quote medical home, a permanent GP, a PCP. Younger people, get along with urgent care, a lot of them, and a young woman with her GYN as her primary care person. I think my GYN was probably my primary care person in my early 20s, because who's really sick except those who get really sick, who are younger. So we're at a pivot point. The question of fragmentation is interesting, because it doesn't have to be fragmented if it's designed well for data to follow the patient, to be tracked by the patient, and to be managed by the patient. But most patients are not ready for that yet. We think about an electronic health record, Epic, Cerner / Oracle, whatever, And that can't take in my I'm pointing to my Apple Watch data, my Oura Ring data. I'm pointing to my sleep data coming from somewhere else, my cardio mobile data, whatever. So we want data to represent our health, right? It does, but not if it's not altogether available. So we look to companies like Validic, which helps move data around with standards, and they're at CES speaking and supporting all the efforts of all these digital health companies to bring data together. So we're in a period where we're building, and we want data to follow the patient to audit their data, manage their data, consult with their data, learn from their data, get insights. And so this is moving fast. And the real question that I speak to the medical community about is, are you going to be relevant to young people if you're not designful and enchanting the way people want care, omni-channel, on their terms, representing their values and their sense of value? How much do they have to pay? What's the ROI for that interaction, both financial and time? And so we're in a moving moment now. So you're asking a question about fragmentation. It could be separate, but it could be integrated. So it's all about the data and how quickly can we bring that together in ways that people will engage with it. So the designers become really important, looking at users and what people really want. Older people, younger people, people of different ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomics, etc. So yeah, it's a complicated design problem, and the question is, nobody really wants to be a patient. So how do we make it more fun, engaging? And I think it can be that way. Today in my blog, I wrote about a European, France-based hotel chain called Accor, which runs the Novotel brand, and they are now becoming the quiet wellness hotel chain where they're using the word longevity for travelers. Eat, sleep, move, and meet are the 4 pillars. So when we look at hotel and travel, joining our health ecosystem, you better believe I take this stuff really seriously. And that is part of people's health DIY approach, travel, tourism, for business or pleasure. Again, another piece of data coming from a hotel.
Well, so thank you for that very thorough answer. And I think one of the things I've always been a big proponent of, and you and I have discussed this, that there is the risk of the, disintermediation. However, it is those experiences, and if you can make them pleasurable and meet people where they are. So whether that's they're, shopping for something at Walgreens or Walmart or Amazon or whatever, and you can make it easier for them to cover another base, then removing that friction can go a long way to them paying more attention to their health. So I love that. And by the way, a funny little aside. So you mentioned Validic. I saw the picture of you and Drew Schiller, who actually spoke on a panel with me. And because you invoked Aura and Google, this was a Verizon event that my friend Robin Goldsmith, I don't know if you know Robin, but he had hosted, and we were talking about this whole idea of data and sort of the data that's collected by like the Auras and the Googles of the world, which is more of a unstructured data, and sort of translating it into more clinical style data, and how do the Validics of the world collect these and do, play that middleman role. So anyway, the world comes full circle. And of course, you and I are connected to so many of the same people. I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to be mindful of that. I have a couple more serious questions, and then we'll get into sort of the more lighthearted questions. One of them that I'm really interested in sort of hearing your answer to is, and this is a big picture question, if you could reallocate 10%, which is a lot of money, because I think healthcare is one of the biggest line items in the United States budget, 10% of the U.S. healthcare budget to a single non-medical social determinant of health. We've talked about this before. These are things like housing, food, broadband. You mentioned broadband. Where would it have the highest return on investment, or ROI?
It's something I think about a lot. If I were queen, I talk with my friend Lisa Sunan about this a lot. If we could do something like that. Alex Drain, same thing. For me, the fundamental social determinant or driver of health is education. We're in a moment now of misinformation. right? People don't trust science. They don't trust doctors. They don't trust government. Where's the trust? Where's the trust? So if we had that 10% of the billions of dollars we spend on 5 billion we spend on healthcare, we could fund early childhood education and even prenatal mom education for nutrition in the womb, exercise, get your visits in. Please, my dear, look at the sonogram. Early childhood education, all the way through public education, good quality education. Then we come out with literate, critical thinking people. Now, this is, of course, again, I used the phrase Holy Grail early. This would be a holy grail if we valued education and invested in education for everybody and in the way it's best for people. Some people learn differently, so we want to design for young people. So largely they're online, and how do we mix it all up and make it healthful, socially healthy too, to bring people together. But I think it's education, 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 as Nancy Pelosi used to say 3 times, of all the social determinants. And as much as I believe in food as medicine and work on that now in my job, to reimagine the grocery store for health or a big food company dealing with health, these are the things I get paid to think about right now. It would be education. And how do we bring it back to really be meaningful to people? Because in India and China, they kind of get that. And if we think about it, it's too late by high school in America to deal with that. So yeah, if we could go back or right now take 10%, I'm putting it on education.
Very prescriptive answer. And I think, it's so simple and at the same time so complicated, because it is the proverbial teaching a person to fish, right, versus giving them a fish. And so I really like that a lot. My last more serious question, and then we will get into the lighter ones, but you are a trend weaver. And so I would love to know how you filter out the noise of temporary fads from the signals of lasting systemic change. And this is particularly relevant because you will have dropped a few weeks after this episode, but Amy Webb, I don't know if you know Amy, she's a futurist, brilliant woman, lovely, not focused on healthcare as much as, broader trends, but she really gave sort of a good definition of how she focuses on her strategic role and how she provides advice. But I would love to know, as a trend weaver, tell us a little bit about your discerning process.
It's not a brilliant answer. I think it's part art and part science. So the science, who do you trust? Who are trusted messengers of data? So I go to places like Commonwealth Fund, Kaiser Family Foundation. I go to science. I go to Eric Topol. I go to Bob Wachter. I go to Dr. Abraham Verghese, one of the most wonderful men I ever met, who's brilliant. The Lancet, the British Medical Journal, JAMA, New England Journal to some extent, but I find the European journals to be useful too, especially Lancet for public health. I look to academic institutions, right? The teaching hospitals. So who do you trust, right? Trusted nutritionists. And, you have to go to sources of truth and trust, science-based. The art of it is over time you develop sort of a sniff test, a gut check, whatever, the more you get educated. So the more I learn, the more I am comfortable with my sniff test radar. And it's practice. It's sort of cutting through it. I get a lot of Google alerts every night. It's a lot of stuff, but I kind of can zero in on the right things because of practice. I've been doing this for a long, long time. I am blessed with a brain that I may have been diagnosed with ADHD as a kid. I don't know. We'll never know. But I have a brain that can put things together in, as Colin Hung wrote about me, as a trend weaver, and I'm also a paper crafter who uses mixed media. His title for the piece was A Collage of Insights. I am a collager of ideas and thinking from different media. So there's the great scene in the movie Working Girl with Melanie Griffith. She's in the
Love it.
elevator, the lift with Mr. Trask, who owns Trask Industries, a media company. And he says to her, to prove that she came up with the idea and not Sigourney Weaver, the dreaded boss, he says, how'd you come up with the idea? She says, well, I ripped this piece from the engagement wedding section from the newspaper about your daughter marrying so-and-so, and he happens to be a disc jockey in a market where he's going to leave. He's like a Howard Stern character. And if you don't keep him in place, you're going to lose a big revenue generator, et cetera. And then an article from Forbes magazine about the company and the media industry. So this is what I do. I put stuff together and I have fun doing it. That's the way my brain works. So there's a bit of DNA in this as well.
Well, that's a great answer. And I think the most important piece of what you just said is it's that trusted resources. And I am a big believer, and I encourage my kids, family, anybody that will listen, especially in this day of disinformation and misinformation, to triangulate. So start with sources you trust and try to look at a number of them. And by the way, that goes from the left to the right. Like if you read
Yes.
something and it sounds a little bit too good to believe, maybe go to Fox or go to something else and just at least get the different viewpoints. Because I
Sure.
do find you're right. Like there's no substitute for that experience, but having those credible sources, having people like you that I know to go to, it's like if I want to get the real tea on something, I know I can go to Jane, and she will, sort of separate the wheat from the chaff on that front. So,
Thank you.
thank you for sharing that. All right, so these are the sort of lighter, more fun questions. One of them's a little heavier, but I'm sure you'll have a great answer. The first one is a show or podcast, ideally something that's not like a heavy documentary that you're really enjoying right now.
Well, laughter is medicine, right? Right now, we need to laugh. So I'll pick two podcasts that make me laugh that are very popular. They delight me, and that's Amy Poehler's.
I knew you were going to say that.
Okay.
I love that. Yes.
Well, it's good.
It is great.
She's bloody smart. I mean, who knew? She is. And also, she has great guests on. A really interesting.
Michelle Obama, like Idris Elba, Aubrey. It's amazing.
I love it. This most recent one I heard with Claire Danes. She talks about mental health, and it gets real deep, and then we laugh, and it's beautiful. And then, of course, Smartless with the three guys. And they've been at that since the pandemic. I've been listening to them. I love all three of them for different reasons, and they also have amazing guests on. So that's a huge library to go back to on Smartless as well. Those two. And I listen to a lot of heavy things too, but I'm not going to mention those because laughter and joy, right? We got to grab it.
Couldn't agree more. And we actually just started, my wife and I started listening to Amy's Good Hang and did it on a long car ride, and it just made the time fly by. And I mean, just as an example, she got Idris Elba to talk about poop, and like, how often do you get these like world famous stars to get down into these, very funny sort of mundane things? Yeah. Okay, this is the one I'm also interested in. And by the way, so what some people who are listening to this, because this is not a healthcare only podcast, but Jane is a rock star on a lot of fronts, but particularly in healthcare. She's name dropped some people that are big players like the Dr. Eric Topol's of the world, et cetera, Alex Drains. Of the amazing people you've met in your life, who has impressed you the most?
This will be a non-healthcare person, but somebody who I met, and it sounds very weird, but there was a reason in the great scheme of the world that I met this man. So at University of Michigan undergrad in the Department of Economics was a professor named Professor William Neenan, Neenan, Bill Neenan. Bill Neenan was a very prominent urban economist, taught me about the economics of cities, urban environments, the history of welfare in America, etc. But Bill Neenan was also a Jesuit priest. Unbeknownst to me, for some weeks, taking a class with him. And then we ended up doing a group going to a great bar in Ann Arbor called Dominic's by the law school and sharing pictures of sangria and eating pizza. And all of a sudden I find out he's a Jesuit. And long story short, we became incredibly close. I'm a Jew, and it always interested me. Why was I getting this close? Well, I was never that close to a rabbi, to a Jesuit priest, but it was the economics, and we talked about Kurt Vonnegut, and he was a Renaissance thinker. I graduated from U of M, and eventually he got recruited to go back to the fold, to Boston College, to be head of arts and sciences. If you were at BC in the 80s and early 90s, you knew Bill Neenan because he was around. So I got to go and visit him a lot at BC because I worked for a company based in BC in Boston for a long time. And I met, some of the football players and in the cafeteria and this. But the reason I think I met him is because I fell in love with Robert Kahn, married Robert Kahn, and Robert Kahn's mother, Claudia Forgione, was an ardent Italian Catholic. So I married a Catholic boy with a Jewish father. And Bill Neenan co-officiated our wedding
Oh,
in
that's
Detroit.
amazing.
With a Rabbi Sherman Wein, a friend of my dad's from childhood. But I was friends with Bill Neenan, so he could marry me off to my beloved Robert. And it's one of those weird things. It was a weird hang, and it was totally providential, like full circle. So people at BC who went to BC over a 15, 18-year period, they will know Bill Neenan. He was legendary up there.
I love it. Great answer. And I love the fact that he ended up marrying you.
He did.
Okay, two more. So biggest regret.
Okay, well, of course, everybody has regrets. I think the one I'll share is that I didn't learn history well. I've used the word history a couple times in this. Thankfully, I know I did learn history well because I married a guy who's like an armchair historian who reads history all the time. He read the Hamilton book early and, all of that. But I regret that in my formal education, I didn't have good history teachers in high school, even though I went to a brilliant school district in suburban Detroit, really good school district. But history for me wasn't engaging like math and science and writing, English, I loved. Having said that, over the many years, I've been adult through travel, living in Europe, going to museums. I learn a lot about history now. And of course, Robert's always sharing something he'll look up in Wikipedia, like, did you know that? So it's good I married the guy I married. He's teaching me history in an engaging way.
Oh, that's a good way to sort of solve that blind spot. So thank
Right.
you. And the last one, and I'm trying to remember because one of the questions I asked on my old show is the Deserted Island album. So the new version is which band or artist, ideally one that you can't go see anymore, like the Doors, would you most like to have seen?
Well, Doors would be good. And by the way, the podcast Desert Island Discs from the BBC is one of my favorites too, where you see
I don't think I knew this. So I was today years old when I
Desert
learned this was a
Island
podcast.
Discs.
Okay, good to know.
It's decades old, and you can go all the way back to people from like the 70s to current era. Who would I love? So to channel my dad, my beloved dad, who played jazz and big band for us growing up and danced around the house with my mom. They were so cute. My favorite still today is Ella Fitzgerald
Oh,
singing the
great
old
choice.
American songbooks. That Sammy Kahn, her and that Cole Porter album. I mean, come on, Cole Porter writing X-rated things in brilliant ways with Ella singing it. And I see her in videos now, but to have been able to see her at like Baker's Jazz Lounge in Detroit or in Vegas, or in Chicago, oh my God. And I would love to have met her and hugged her and thanked her for her work in civil rights. I mean, she broke a lot of barriers, walking into bathrooms and restaurants, and she was brave, but fierce. What a singer! So yeah, Ella, she's my number one.
Perfect choice. And one of my proudest moments, she'll appreciate this, my 18-year-old going into her room and hearing that playing while she was showering, Ella Fitzgerald. I'm like, I have done at least one thing right in my life, and that
You
is that my
did
daughter
good.
likes one of the greats.
You
So,
did good. That's like my daughter who loves Stephen Sondheim musicals now.
oh,
She
yeah.
reads the playbooks. So yeah, we're good parents.
We are good parents. Well, on that note, Jane, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. I always am smarter after our conversations. It's always a pleasure to see your smiling face and the light that you bring into the world. So I appreciate you.
Bless you, Aaron. Thanks so much. Love you.
Love you too.